Hi there, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Exploring the World of Open Education workshop series, which we are offering one more time this spring as part of the 2021 Arizona Regional Open Educational Resources Conference. My name is Matthew Bloom. I'm English faculty at Scottsdale Community College and the co-chair of the Open Maricopa project. And I am just going to cover a little bit of logistics, and then I will introduce today's facilitators. So first of all, this is the third workshop in a 7-workshop series that we're offering as part of this conference. We've offered it in the past, so I'll talk a moment about Maricopa faculty professional growth in a moment. But first, I would like to say here, you can see down at the bottom right, there is a link there, URL to a self-paced OER workshop that you can use kind of complement what you see in the workshop today and the rest of the workshops in this series. It's actually publicly visible. So even though it's Maricopa Canvas, it's set so that it's publicly visible. So you should be able to access it. And if you have trouble, please feel free to contact me. Okay, you can go to the next slide. If you do go to all 7 workshops in the series, you can earn OER practitioner certification through what we're formerly calling ourselves as Maricopa Millions. But if you've missed any of the workshops in that series, then keep an eye out for future opportunities for that. But if you're Maricopa faculty, then you have the specific opportunity to earn faculty professional growth in the amount of 1.2 clock hours for today's workshop. Just remember that you have to participate the whole time, so stay on the WebEx call. And there is an evaluation and assessment that you have to fill out within 24 hours. You can find that on the conference website, the link. And then, of course, there's an application that you submit after that. And to be clear, this is part, as I said before, of the Open Education Workshop Series, Exploring the World of Open Education. For that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So I always like to kind of remind folks of a few things before we get started at these workshops, one of which is just a couple of suggested readings. The top one there is a collection of essays that kind of approach open education from a variety of perspectives. And of course, these are both openly licensed materials, so feel free to check them out if you're interested. You can just go and read them online. The one at the bottom is an article called Toward a Sustainable OER Ecosystem, the Case for OER Stewardship. And it just basically examines a few different guidelines for how we can evaluate our participation in open education and determine whether or not it's ethical stewardship of open resources. So I really like these 2 readings as recommended. So you can go to the next slide. Just super quickly, this is the last kind of thing that I really like to stress is that when we're talking about open education, we're not just talking about free stuff for students. It's important to save students money on textbooks and provide access to affordable learning materials. But open education really is about a whole suite of values, and I think that you'll see some of those emerge today in the discussions about what Creative Commons licenses permit and what they don't. And with that in mind, if you go to the next slide, I'll see if I can do the 15-second version of what is open educational resources, but don't set any stopwatches. So an open educational resource is some sort of intellectual property that has been published but made available either under Creative Commons license or some other open sharing license, or it's in the public domain, which means nobody owns the copyright. And these Creative Commons licenses permit different kinds of reuse to everyone in the world. So instead of them having to come to you to ask for that, to ask for permission to remix a material or to redistribute it, the author of the copyright has actually in advance said that. Now, there's going to be a lot of detail because that's what today's workshop is all about, but I wanted to make it clear from the beginning, we're all on the same page. When we're talking about open resources, we're not talking about things that are just free. We're talking about things that you are free to use and to remix in certain ways. And we will get into great detail on that today. So it is my pleasure to introduce, if you want to go to the next slide, I guess it might work, but my pleasure to introduce our guest facilitator today. It's Annalie Monperry. She is the head of the Learning Services Division at Arizona State University Libraries, and she's also the Scholarly Communications Librarian. And so, Annalie, take it away.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks to all of you, especially those of you that were also part of our copyright crash course yesterday, which I know was a lot to talk about and a lot of information to take in. And it's really great to see many familiar names here right away this morning to have part 2 of this part. This workshop, Wiki, what really builds off of some of the information we learned yesterday about copyright. We're going to talk about how the Creative Commons licenses work with copyright in order to give us the permissions and the rights we need in order to make use of content the way we want to for educational purposes. So we're going to talk about Creative Commons as a whole and about kind of the way the different licenses work. We'll talk about how the different Creative Commons licenses can work together. Since there are 6 different ones, it's important to know how they can be used together and when you combine them with other types of works. Then I'll show you some of my favorite, I am a librarian, and some of the things I really like to do is show people sources for finding good information, so some sources for finding and strategies for finding open content. And then a little bit about attribution, which again, we touched on briefly yesterday, but we'll get into a little bit more deeply today. So why do we need Creative Commons licenses? Why are they important? Well, since 1989, copyright has applied automatically without any requirement for registration with the Copyright Office, nor even to put that little copyright symbol on a work. So copyright is effectively an opt-out situation. It applies whether the creator intended for the work to be copyrighted or not. But the lack of registration or notice creates 2 main problems. Number 1, it can be difficult to determine who the original copyright holder is, which makes it really difficult to ask for permission to use the work. And the second main problem is, since many copyright owners aren't even aware that they have these rights because they haven't opted in or opted out, they lack the knowledge to communicate about those rights to others. So in order to address some of these problems, Creative Commons designed their first set of licenses in 2002. And these licenses include a standard set of terms that make it easier for copyright holders to communicate what rights they wish to retain and which permissions they wish to grant to others. So these licenses work alongside copyright law to clarify to potential users how they can use, share, and modify a work without having to ask for permission or be an expert in copyright law, which greatly simplifies the situation for users who know upfront what they can and cannot do with the work. Additionally, the standard licenses are machine readable, which means they can be reliably indexed and searched. So this standard set of terms is incredibly helpful. And as you become familiar with the different licenses and their abbreviations, it becomes really easy to tell at a glance what you can and cannot do with any given work. So there are 6 Creative Commons licenses. And this table kind of breaks things down a little bit, so in groups to kind of group like licenses together. One key thing to notice is that all licenses require the user to provide attribution. And it's important to know that copyright law doesn't require a copyright statement or attribution. It is our good academic practice, the practice of academic integrity and citing our sources, that is what kind of drives our desire to make attribution in especially in educational situations. But copyright doesn't have a requirement for you to provide attribution, but Creative Commons licenses do. So you are always giving credit to the creator. The licenses provide 3 different options around creation and distribution of derivative use. So, and a derivative work. So remember, a derivative work is when you're using something to kind of make something new off of that work. So if I had a poem and I wanted to turn it into a song, or if I had a short story and I wanted to turn it into a short video, those would be derivative works. And then these licenses provide 2 different options around commercial use. So some allow commercial uses, some do not allow commercial uses. We'll talk about each one in a little bit of detail here. So the most permissive license is the Creative Commons Attribution License, or sometimes known as the CC BY. So BY attribution. This license lets other people distribute, remix, tweak, and build upon your work, even commercially, as long as they credit you for the original creation. This is the most accommodating of licenses offered, and it's recommended for the maximum dissemination and use of licensed materials. Another thing that I think is important to know, yourself as a copyright creator and as you're working with Creative Commons licensed materials, is that if you do make changes, if you modify, adapt, or create a derivative work from the original work, you need to indicate that in your attribution. For example, if you've taken an excerpt or cropped a photo, you can just note, cropped or excerpted or something like that in your attribution statement. But trivial alterations like correcting a typo or changing a font size are not something that you need to note in your attribution. So the next license is the Creative Commons Attribution. You see it's got the BY non-commercial NC. This license lets others remix, tweak, and build upon your work as long as it's for a non-commercial purpose. And any new works must acknowledge you and be also non-commercial. Commercial uses are defined as those that are primarily intended for or directed toward commercial advantage or monetary compensation. And so inclusion of primarily in this definition recognizes that no activity is completely disconnected from commercial activity. We see that here in our educational environment, right? We're nonprofit and we are, but our students pay tuition to attend our institutions. And so there is some commercialism going in there, right? So for example, a nonprofit organization like a school could not use a non-commercial licensed work for a fundraising campaign because that's more of a commercial purpose. But similarly, a for-profit entity would be able to use a non-commercially licensed work for a free professional training module that they were just giving to their staff. So the important part is it's the use, not the user. Okay. The next license, and this one kind of gets a little bit complicated, is the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike, the SA. You can see the little circle around. That means you kind of pay it forward. This license lets you do anything you want with the work, remix, tweak, and build upon the work, even for commercial purposes, as long as they provide attribution. And if they are creating a new work, if they are modifying it and remixing it into something new, that new creation has to be released under the same license, the Share Alike license. So this license is often compared to copyleft, free and open source software licenses. All new works carry the same license, so any derivatives will also allow commercial use. This is the license used by Wikipedia and is recommended for materials that would benefit from incorporating content from Wikipedia and similarly licensed products. So if you're working on like creating Wikipedia articles as an active course assignment, for example, you'd be using this license for work that you and your students create or anything that you take from Wikipedia. Okay, now this is the Creative Commons Attribution No Derivative, the ND and the little equal sign. So this allows you to share your work, to share the other person's work for commercial or non-commercial purposes, as long as it is passed along unchanged and in whole, and you provide attribution to the user. So remember that a derivative work is a new work based on modifying existing copyrighted work, and it has to be sufficiently creative to deserve its own copyright. So a really clear example of a derivative work, as I said, is making a book into a movie or translating an essay into another language. But some things that wouldn't apply would be, again, correcting punctuation or spelling, or converting an essay from PDF to HTML, for example. So this one is not considered necessarily like an open educational resource license because it doesn't give you the ability to remix and modify the work. And then there is the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative License. So this one is just like the non-derivative license that we just mentioned, and it is the most restrictive because not only can you not make any changes or modifications to the work, but you also can't use it for a commercial purpose. And again, your use can't be commercial. It's not about your user. So again, like if you're using it for a fundraiser or some other thing that you wanted to do that would be for a commercial purpose, even if you're doing it for a nonprofit entity, you would not be able to do that. A really good example of a product that uses this license are TED Talks. So most of the TED Talks are licensed under this non-commercial, no derivatives license, which means it's great. I mean, we're happy that TED does this because we can share and redistribute these videos, including downloading the file and re-uploading them into our own learning management system if we needed to, as long as we don't modify them and as long as we're not using them for a commercial purpose. Okay. There is another Creative Commons license that is the non-commercial attribution attribution non-commercial share alike. And just like the share alike license, you still have to release it under that same license, but you can't use it for a commercial purpose. So, you know, this is the different blocks that fit together. And I didn't put a separate slide for that one because it's pretty quick. And finally, Creative Commons has a kind of a public domain designation known as CC0. This is no rights reserved. So this allows scientists, educators, artists, and other creators and owners of copyright content to waive copyright to the extent that they can and place them as completely as possible in the public domain, so that others may freely build upon, enhance, and reuse the work for any purposes without restriction under copyright or database law. So some art sites like Unsplash use the Creative Commons 0 license. So you're not required to provide attribution, and you can use the work however you want to. It's not quite public domain because this Creative Commons is an international standard. So it works alongside copyright law, not just the United States, but in other countries around the world. Some countries' copyright codes have what is known as moral rights, which means that unlike US copyright law, you always have to provide attribution to the author, and an author cannot give up their right to be associated with that work. In the United States, if I sign over a copyright transfer to a publisher, I no longer have any rights to that work, including requiring legally that they give credit to me for being the original creator. But that's not the case in many of the EU copyright laws, for example. So that's part of the reason why we say it's like as completely as possible into the public domain. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about how these Creative Commons licenses fit together and how we use them together. So here's an example that I really like that somebody else made, Nate Undell, who's somebody who works with a good open education advocate. and he licensed this under a Creative Commons attribution license. And I'm verbally giving him credit because it's a really great way of thinking about how these pieces work together. So a TV dinner style open work is when you collect separate works together and redistribute that collection. So if you are collecting different pieces for your course and you got like an open textbook here from OpenStax, you got some stuff from Wikipedia, you pulled some modules from Merlot, and you put them all together into your course. But you clearly separated each work in its attribution. So in this case, you are not remixing the work, but you're curating them and offering this curation to others. So like with real TV dinners, you could still consume each ingredient by itself because they are served with clear boundaries separating each. So in an open license TV dinner, each work maintains its separate license, and the collection itself does not need to reconcile the different licenses because each work stands alone in the collection. So this is where, like in your course, if you were making a Canvas Commons course and you wanted to apply an open license to your course, you could say, unless otherwise specified, this work is licensed under a CC BY license. And then each one of the works you use might have had the, share alike peas, the non-derivative, I don't know what that might be, mashed potatoes with gravy, perhaps. Those things don't have to reconcile. They can be just shared in your course. So a smoothie open work is when you are mixing together parts or whole of one work with parts or wholes of other works to create a new derivative work that includes material from many sources. So like with real smoothies, you can't easily separate the different ingredients once they're blended together. In an open license smoothie, you can only include works with mutually compatible open licenses, and the open license of your final work, the full derivative work, must be consistent with the licenses of the included works, which is typically the most restrictive license. So in this smoothie example, we have public domain strawberries, so those are easy. We have the attribution pineapple, so we need to make sure to include attribution there. We have a non-commercial banana, so we have to make sure that our use is not commercial. And then we have the share alike, non-commercial share alike oranges. So because those oranges are share alike and we've incorporated them into our smoothie, our final smoothie has to have that same license. So that's why that license is under the non-commercial share alike license, because of that, condition of the license that our new work has to have that same license. Okay, so this is a chart that kind of gives you another visual about how the different pieces fit together. So you can see that you can't use a derivative works license with a share alike license because you won't be able to make any changes to that. And share alike, because it requires that license, doesn't work with like the non-commercial license because the regular share alike would allow commercial use, but the non-commercial license restricts commercial use, right? So those are just some of the ways you can take into consideration. And here I can share the link to this chart to all of you because I think it's really helpful. Okay, so this is a good part to pause and see if there are any questions about the Creative Commons licenses.
Hi, Annalie. There's a question from Linda Herden. Have there been any court rulings upholding share alike Creative Commons is not a law, but an agreed upon practice, correct?
Oh, that's a great question. So Creative Commons is a law. It's a legal license. So it's not written in copyright law, but if you are using the works under these licenses, you agree to the terms of that license. Just like when you're using, works like that you download from iTunes. You click I agree to that terms of use. And so this is contract law that is binding. I don't know if I've seen any court situations around share alike yet, but there have been, there is legal precedent for enforcing a Creative Commons license. For example, there was a photographer who uploaded a really nice photo that they had taken and put a Creative Commons attribution license on this. So pretty open license. And he discovered that some company was using his photo as the kind of header of their website, but without attribution. So he contacted them and said, hey, if you're using my work, you either need to ask for permission or you need to go by the terms of this license and provide attribution. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. So he did file a copyright infringement suit against them and won, because the court said, all you had to do was provide attribution. You clearly were not abiding by the terms of this license. So therefore it was copyright infringement. So these are legally binding terms. And, while there's not a long history of legal precedent yet, we do have this one that the courts are upholding the terms of the Creative Commons license. That was a good question, Linda. Thank you.
Here's one from Alyssa Ortiz. If a teacher wants to use a textbook but take out several chapters before distributing it to their students, how would they attribute that?
Yeah, it's not really that hard. You could just say, this is this textbook by this person used under this license. We're using chapters 1, 2, 5, 7, and 9. Or we are not using, it's the full textbook, but missing chapters 4, 5, and 6. So you just indicate that. And normally you provide a link to the original work, so people could always see the original work if they wanted to. You just indicate that I took some out, or I'm only using these particular pieces of the work.
And is the textbook copyrighted?
I would say, Linda, maybe you can provide some more context to your work, to your question, but generally speaking, copyright is, all textbooks are copyrighted. I guess I assumed that Alyssa was asking about a textbook that was openly licensed, that had a Creative Commons license. So if it did have Creative Commons licensing, then she would be able to move different chapters. Yeah, and I see Alyssa was saying it wouldn't work for non-derivative textbooks. That's true. You wouldn't want to just take pieces of it. It says whole and unchanged as part of your non-derivative. But again, if it's an open textbook that has a non-derivative license, they do still have the ability to view the whole thing for free. So you could just say, here's the whole textbook, but we're only going to be using these chapters. So even though they can still see it, just like they do when they purchase textbooks, you might not use every chapter as part of your curriculum. Yes, Linda, if it does not specify Creative Commons, you cannot apply a Creative Commons license. So the Creative Commons licenses are a decision, an action taken by a copyright holder to give permission in advance. If something doesn't have a Creative Commons license on it, you have to assume that you will be abiding under all of the same copyright, that they're retaining their full rights, their exclusive rights as a copyright holder, and that any uses of that work would have to be done under the educational exceptions or fair use or asking for permission that we talked about yesterday. So that's one of the nice things about Creative Commons licenses is you just look for them If you see them, you go, great, I know what to do. And if you don't see it, you say, okay, now I need to like go through this decision framework about whether or not I can still use this thing. I always love seeing the Creative Commons licenses. And that's one of the reasons why it's so great that there's a lot of different places you can go to find, specifically look for and find openly licensed content. So are there any other questions before we move along? Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and jump ahead. So the next section of this workshop is we're going to talk about different strategies and sources for finding open content. So one thing, you know, everybody always wants to go straight to Google. So you can limit your search in regular Google search to Creative Commons licensed materials, but you have to go to the advanced search form to start if you want to find that limit. So you can see on this screenshot that, you know, you put in your search terms, and at the bottom there's a usage rights option, and you can choose Creative Commons licenses. But if you start your search from just the regular Google search bar, there's not it's not one of the options to limit or facet your search once you've done your search. You have to start from the advanced search function. And then one thing that I would always caution you about is that Google doesn't index everything. It is specifically known to be spotty at best when indexing institutional or disciplinary repositories, which is where a lot of open content that's created by institutions, by universities, by research societies may be curated in these repositories, but Google may not be indexing them and may skip over them. So that's one of the caveats I would give with starting with the Google search. But I like letting you know it is an option, so you can always try it depending on the kind of content you might be looking for. If you were looking for scholarly articles, these are a couple of great tools that I love to recommend, either the Open Access button or the Unpaywall browser extension. The Open Access button and browser, the Unpaywall, are ways to look for an open access version of a scholarly article. So it may not be, so this is not something where you go if you don't know what you're looking for. Say there's an article that you want to use and you don't know, you don't have access to it, right? It might be something you have to request through interlibrary loan, or you know, your library or your institution, or you don't have a subscription to that content. You can plug information about that article into one of these two tools, or the Unpaywall is a browser extension, which gives you a little icon on your browser to let you know if there's an open access version of that article. And many scholarly authors are increasingly putting versions of their articles in these institutional or disciplinary repositories. At ASU, we have an institutional repository, and many of our faculty put their articles in our repository in an open access way. And this is, you know, something that's getting more and more common across the academy, across research and publication practices. So these are a couple of really good tools to know. And I will let you know, like I will, you know, I think you'll all get a copy of the slides after this. And I have a handout that I'll be giving you a link to a little bit later on that has these links. So you should still have access to them later. Let's see. The Google search doesn't let you have the option. Did you start in advanced search, Catherine? You have to go straight there. You can't see it unless you start from the advanced search form.
Yes, so I went to the advanced search. It's just very specific. Now I got to try to pull it up against another window, but it's listing off filtered by license, free to use or share, free to use, share, even commercially, free to use, share, or modify, free to use, share, or modify, even commercially. So which one would that fall under?
Oh, okay. That's funny. I thought that had, so I wonder if they changed it back. So that was the old way they had showing Creative Commons licenses. And then I checked when I took the screenshot, I was like, oh, great, they made it easier for everybody by just saying all Creative Commons licenses. So free to use and share, then you kind of have to think a little bit about how that applies. It makes you kind of interpret that against the Creative Commons licenses. So free to use and share would be a non-derivative license. If it doesn't say even commercially, then it's the non-commercial license. So it's kind of like working backwards. So free to use and share even commercially would be the Creative Commons non-derivative license. Something that says free to use, share, and modify would be like the attribution non-commercial, and free to use, share, and modify even for commercial purposes would be the Creative Commons attribution license. So you kind of have to work backwards. I'm sorry, I'll go and look and see if they've changed it back to that, or maybe you might be on an older browser. I'm not quite sure why it would not be the same, but that was the way that they had it displayed earlier. I thought they changed it to this much easier, just Creative Commons licenses.
Thank you. And yes, if it's the wrong browser, please let me know. And then, yeah, so you said this PowerPoint is going to be available too, just so I can, this is almost like a quiz for me right now, trying to remember which one and match it up.
I know. Well, I always have to sit back and be like, okay, use, share, and modify means they're allowing derivative works. So it has to be one of these other licenses. It takes a little bit, again, it takes some practice to try to walk backwards and interpret what that means.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, you're welcome. So here's a really great tool, the Mason OER Meta Finder, which you can find at mom.gmu.edu. Was created by George Mason University Libraries, and they were pretty awesome. So hey, go George Mason for Catherine there. They created the OER Meta Finder, which performs a simultaneous search across 21 different sources of open educational and open access content. So it searches well-known OER repositories like OpenStax, OER Commons, and Merlot, but it also searches sites like HathiTrust, the DPLA, Digital Public Library of America, and the Internet Archive. Which is valuable but often overlooked open access materials that can be used for educational purposes. So, and you can see here that you can choose from these sources. Like if you decide you want to limit your search to particular sources because maybe you're looking specifically for textbooks or more recent material, well, then you're not necessarily going to want to be searching Project Gutenberg, which is mostly older public domain content. So maybe you want to take that out so you don't accidentally get some of that content. And similarly, this is the Oasis meta search. It's openly available sources integrated search, which was created by Suni Geneseo. And this search tool aims to make the discovery of open content easier. It currently searches across open content from 98 different sources. I will note real quick, I'm going to go back, that you can see that Oasis is one of the repositories that the MOM Meta Finder searches. So there's some duplicated content here. You may prefer this interface than the George Mason OER Meta Finder. So, but these are both good places to start. One thing I like about Oasis is that you can immediately filter your search by what you're looking for, right? So maybe you really want to find interactive simulations because you're teaching like gene folding or something, and a simulation about that might be helpful. You could just go right in there and go to interactive simulations to find something. Or, you know, you're specifically looking for audiobooks. So you can immediately start your search by going to that particular facet. Okay, I hope you are all familiar with the Internet Archive, which is a nonprofit library of lots of books, movies, software, music, websites, and more. Our favorite Wayback Machine is part of the Internet Archive. Not everything in this the Internet Archive is openly licensed. A lot of it is just freely available, but there is a secret way. This is kind of like a really nerdy librarian way for those of you that are librarians or that may be older search experience, you know, used to like more historic pre-Google internet searching days, and that you can use a specific kind of Boolean query in order to find an open license. You have to do a search that looks like this. I'm going to put it in the chat, and you can see it up there in the search term that you have to put in license URL : HTTP, and then asterisk the license you're looking for, but not using the CC part, just BYNC or BY or, you know, BYSA. And if you do that, you'll be able to search the Internet Archive to specifically find openly licensed content. So again, like this might not be your first strategy, but if you like the Internet Archive and maybe the kind of content you like using is on the Internet Archive, this is one way you can filter your search for Creative Commons content. So one thing that all of us, I do this all the time, and you can tell, you know, because I've got a lot of images on my slides. I love using images when I'm teaching and providing, you know, any kind of instruction, workshop, presentation, or whatever. So Google Images does allow you to filter your results by Creative Commons licenses. And I don't know if this is the same problem that we had with the advanced search. You might want to try it. Last time I did this search, I was able to do, you can do your search in images.google.com, and then you can filter your search by usage rights. And by, you know, you go to tools, you do usage rights, and it should let you choose Creative Commons licenses. Or maybe it gives that fun reverse puzzle, which they used to do. Like, I'm serious, I just replaced this screenshot like in the fall with the new Creative Commons license, but maybe it's gone back to the older way. One caveat though, and this does apply to not only the image search, but to Google search, is that when it does pull up results, they may be inaccurate. So it may be that you find an image, you limit to that search, but then I would always go to the original source to make sure that the image itself has that open license. Because sometimes it may be like somebody's blog or website that they have licensed as Creative Commons attribution, but the image they pulled from a different source, or the image itself might not be licensed. So it's good practice to just go in and double check. So this is part of the reason I do like to be a little more targeted with search when I'm searching for images. You can do this in Google Images. But one of my favorite sources is the Creative Commons image search. So this image search provides results from multiple public repositories. So they include Flickr, they have a lot of museum and art collections, they have Wikimedia Commons, it includes the World Register of Marine Species for some of you who might be biologists or want to be able to include some scientific images. So you can search across these using the Creative Commons search. And one of the things that I like is that it gives you, not only gives you the image on the slide here, but it gives you the attribution information you need. And so you can just copy and paste the attribution and use it in however you're using that course, however you're using that image. So again, it is a pretty intense, extensive search, so you will get a lot of results. And you might want to, there's ways you can limit your search when you do it. So if you're looking for something other than, images or text, maybe you're looking for audio or music or clip art or something like that, there's the old Creative Commons search, oldsearch.creativecommons.org, that you can do some searches for some specific places. And here, I'm going to put the link in here. And I think Matthew wanted to say something about one that we like to highlight here, CC Mixer. Matthew, would you like to jump in with your invitation?
Yes, perfect timing. Thank you, Annalie. I just wanted to let everybody know that one of the things that we're doing as part of the AZ Regional Conference is asking for contributions or suggestions for an openly licensed music playlist that we'll provide to all of the registrants at some point during the conference as kind of a virtual swag item. And so you'll see I put a link in the chat there to a Google form. And if you're interested and you have some time and you want to suggest some tunes for the playlist, then you can use CC Mixter. There's also a website called Free Music Archive. Those URLs are both in the Google form, but you can go through and just, if you find one or two tracks of openly licensed music, no matter what the genre is or whatever, I mean, it could be classical or death metal, doesn't matter. But if you have suggestions, then put them in the Google form, and we'll review them, and as long as they're appropriate, they'll end up on the playlist. So I participate.
Thank you, Matthew. And I'm looking forward to this playlist. There's nothing like having some good openly licensed music to listen to. I meant to bring this up earlier because it's kind of a scenario that we often hear is, what if I am making a video and I find some Creative Commons music that I want to use, but it says no derivatives. It's a music track with a no derivative license. So if you are using a music track and incorporating it into a video, you are, even though you're not making changes to the music itself, you are making a new derivative work by putting the music with the images that you're using. So when you use music tracks in videos or lectures or something like that, if you're incorporating it into a video, you will want to make sure that the license complies with your use. So that's kind of a common question, a common situation that I just wanted to bring your attention to while we were talking about music. Okay, so next, as a reminder, we've talked about all these Creative Commons licenses, and all of them except the Creative Commons 0 license require attribution. So it's really important to incorporate attribution as a good practice while putting together using Creative Commons licensed work. So yesterday, I showed you this Washington's Open Attribution Builder, which is one of my favorite resources. I have it bookmarked on all my browsers because it just makes it so easy to provide a good attribution that's consistently formatted when I incorporate things into slides or other instructional materials. You can see that you can choose which license it is, and it includes all of the important pieces that are required for Creative Commons attribution. It doesn't have to use a particular citation standard, but for Creative Commons licensed content, there's 4 important components you want to make sure that are included: the title of the work, the author or creator of the work, the source, where did you get it from, and which license is there. And it's best practice to include the link to the license as well. So you can see that when you put, you can copy and paste all of that information into the Open Attribution Builder, and it gives you the embed code if you wanted to use an HTML embed code, or just copy and paste the rich text into your work. And here's something that I really like to highlight. I know that, suddenly many of you may be like, I've got all sorts of ideas for how I'm going to revise all of my courses. So as you are finding material that you want to use in your courses, it's a really good idea to keep track of everything you want to use, especially if you're searching across a lot of different sources. So I recommend keeping track of the attribution information for the content you're using in a table or a spreadsheet, like an example on this site. You can see that really the main parts are like, who's the author, what's the title, where did I get it from, and what is the license. So I would, kind of make this as a best practice. It's kind of like a data management system, right? So you're keeping track of all the content that you want to use. And not only is it good practice to, do to comply with the attribution requirement for open access content, but it's also something that your future self or people that you might co-teach later on in years later will be so happy that you did it, because then when you look back 2 or 3 years later and refreshing a course, you're like, where did I get that thing and why did I use it? Here you documented it and you can always go back and find it again. Okay, so now we're going to pause and take a little bit of time. And I don't think, there's not a lot of us. I don't think we need to do breakout rooms today. But I have a couple of questions for you, and you can feel free to unmute and talk, or if you'd rather discuss in the chat, let's take a few minutes and talk a little bit about, which tools that we've talked about so far are you most excited to try, or that seem like they might be most useful for your work? And is there a need that you have that we didn't talk about yet today? If there's some specific type of content or some situation that you're like, I don't know if I would know how to deal with this situation, then let's go ahead and take about 10 minutes or so and have an open discussion. I'm patient. I know that it takes a little bit of time to type. So if the image doesn't have a specific title, like on Wikimedia Commons, how would we attribute it? Should we use the file name? Often there is a title if you scroll down to the metadata aspect of a Wikimedia Commons page. But yeah, if you don't know the title, you could have the file name, but you probably have the link of where you got it, and that would work. Let's see. Intrigued to use Oasis. Yeah, I really like, this is, I know this applies to a lot of you, but often I'm working with instructors at ASU and I'm like, go look for open content. And they're like, I don't know where to start. And being able to say, try Oasis, try the Meta Finder, or sometimes they even say, go straight to OpenStax. Are you looking for a textbook? Try OpenStax or try the Open Textbook Network and see if there's something there. Like, people can feel really overwhelmed if they start with a Google search. They don't even know what to do. If you can say, go right here and look here, limit your search, then it can be really helpful. It's less overwhelming, and the results you find are more likely to be something that you want to look at, take the time to evaluate, and might be most helpful for you.
Roseanne comments that she is intrigued to use Oasis as more instructors are asking for OER material, and it can be daunting to search so many paths.
Right. Yeah, Oasis is a great search tool. I really like it. Advanced image search, also very fun. I often find myself looking around for a few different sites. You might be able to tell. Like I said, I like using fun images in my, especially in my presentations. And so I will go down a rabbit hole of trying to find the perfect image that, somebody else might not get it, but I think, I find it, that's what I want for my use. And I will do Google image, I will search Pixabay, I will search the Creative Commons search, I'll look at the Noun project. And one thing that also, I'm going to share a link with all of you in just a moment. I have a library guide that kind of curates a lot of, places to go to find open content. And there are some really great image collections that are intentionally more diverse in their representation. So there's Women of Color in Tech, which is a Flickr collection. And it's really fantastic because it's got all of these women with, that are women of color, and they are using computers, and they're, showing data, and they're having tech conversations, and that kind of representation really matters. And so sometimes it's really good to go straight to a source like that and get targeted about including content that's going to be more representative of our actual population, of our actual student body, and not just showing a bunch of white men using computers. We know that everybody uses it, right? But if you do a basic Google image search for using a computer, probably most of them are going to be white men using computers. We sometimes want to have other people displayed, right? So that's another good thing to consider. And one of the other situations that I also could like to think about is that one of the nice things about openly licensed content is, especially if you have that permission that you need in order to do like remixing or adaptations or modifications to your work, that is another way that you can build in better representation. So like an anecdote that I have heard is that there was a math professor that modified the open math textbook that he was using because every example in the book used the he, him pronouns, every single example. And so he wanted to make sure that, other genders were represented in this book. So he modified all of the examples so that they had different genders that were included to just be more representative of there are women that learn math, and think about math problems. So including those genders was an important thing. Okay, are there any other comments anybody would like to make at this point? Okay, so now we're gonna come on back here, and there's just a couple of ways that, if you want, I know I gave you this like really crash course on Creative Commons, but if you're interested in learning more and becoming kind of a Creative Commons expert, there is a Creative Commons open education platform. Oh, actually, I skipped ahead a slide. But this Creative Commons open education platform is a global community for open education practitioners to share their experiences, to share tips with one another. I know some of these groups, like we have a libraries and OER listserv, and if you jump on there and you're like, I'm looking for an open access textbook for this particular course, there'll be like all these librarians that just pile in with, oh, what about this one? Oh, what about this one? So these communities can be really helpful. So here is the link for some ways to get involved with the Creative Commons open education platform. And this is the certificate that I talked about. There is a 10-week online course that gives you this really in-depth knowledge about Creative Commons licenses and how to use them in different situations. They have an educator track and a librarian track. So for those of you that are instructors, that might be a really good option for you. Matthew's a graduate of the certificate program, so he can vouch for its usefulness. And it does have a tuition fee of $500. I know though, like at ASU, I'd be able to probably request professional development funds to do this certificate program. I think there may be similar sort of grant options in Maricopa if that's something that you were interested in doing.
Hi, Annalie, real quick, I would just say that if you are Maricopa faculty, that's the kind of thing that you can use your professional growth funds for, like conference funding. And the other thing that I would say too is that all of the Creative Commons materials for that course are CC BY, and you can actually just go to the website and kind of go through them yourself if you just want to learn.
Right. If you don't want to earn the certificate, but you want to learn it because you know it's important to you, then it's definitely there as like a self-paced professional development opportunity. And thanks for providing that information, Matthew. So here are a few other additional resources that I'd recommend. There's a really good Creative Commons license FAQ that can help with some of the more basic questions about different licenses. If you really want, I'm still not quite sure about what counts as a commercial use. Sometimes the FAQ might be able to help you with that. Here's the library guide I mentioned that has a bunch of different learning open resources. So it's a good place to go if you're looking for different kinds of content, like if you want to focus on images or books or audio or video. And then here's a handout. And then I'm going to just paste the link to the handout in the chat here. And that is the end of my formal presentation here. So I think we still have a few more minutes if you have any further questions or comments that you'd like to provide. But otherwise, thanks for coming. And I hope this was useful to all of you.